for December 2025.
Okay, and it looks like Chair Jenny Biggs has called to order the meeting of the December 3rd Marin Wildfire Community Oversight Committee at 3:06 p.m. on Wednesday, December 3rd. Starting with roll call, we have Rebecca Suggs.
Here.
Larry Minikus.
Present.
John McCauley.
Here.
Jim Wagner.
Present.
Jenny Biggs.
Here.
And to just note for the attendance today, we do not have Scott Pinsky or Pat Randolph, but we do have a quorum and the meeting will proceed.
And Theo Homan.
We also do not have Theo Homan this afternoon.
Okay, great. I think first up is a question about agenda adjustments. Are there any from the committee? No, then I think that we can move on. Do we go straight to open time for public expression?
We do not currently have a public, but we can go ahead and read the announcement just for, did you want me to go ahead?
Sure.
Okay. The public is welcome to address the Community Oversight Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the community. We do ask that any attendees please silence cell phones during the meeting and mute the microphone when not reporting out. We do not currently have any public attendees, Chair. Should someone arrive, I will let you know.
Thank you. Then in that case, we can proceed with the staff report from Marin Wildfire's Executive Officer, Mark Brown.
Good evening, everybody. I'll keep it really brief. As you probably have noticed, we haven't had too many exec committee or board meetings. There just hasn't been a lot of business items to pursue. A lot of work behind the scenes, but just nothing that we really required board level approval. But we do plan on having a board meeting on December 18th with some of our business items that we have. And then we will have a little holiday gathering afterwards. So of course, any of the COC members who wish to attend in person are welcome to attend the holiday gathering afterwards.
You said December 18th?
December 18th, 3 o'clock next door. And then as you guys are working on the annual report for fiscal year 24-25, Marin Wildfire and our staff is working on the overall agency's annual report. So we're pounding away at that and have some of the same financial data numbers to crunch as you guys do. And as many of you know, we've had a transition in staff at Southern Marin Fire for finance. Their finance team is back up and running at full strength now, and we've set a deadline for December 19th for the financial data that we're all looking for, both the COC and both Marin Wildfire staff. So I've met with the Deputy Chief of Administration yesterday, and we feel confident that December 19th deadline is achievable. COC recruitment is technically closed. We had some good success with it. We are going to follow up on a couple other leads, and with the hope to bring the slate of recommended new members to the board for the December 18th meeting.
And will we be fully populated?
Most likely not. Most likely not. I have a feeling we'll be about the same level that we're at now.
Okay.
Could still continue some more leads that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I just want to wish you all very happy holidays for you and your families, and thank you for your ongoing work, your support, and overall helping make Marin Wildfire a better organization.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You say the same right back to you, Mark. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the committee?
I just have one 50,000-foot question. So as you know, in the early years, you were prudently underspending the revenues as you were ramping up. And then our last year, it was almost break even. What's it looking like now? Are you overspending, which is burning off the backlog?
I think we may have plateaued. I'm not 100% sure, but looking at the early numbers, I think we kind of plateaued with this last fiscal year and kept the spend rate about the same as the previous year, which is good. But I wanted to see a little bit more growth than we had, but I'm not sure we did.
Okay, yeah, because you got still a fairly decent backlog.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Backlog and spending.
Yes.
Yeah, cumulative spending relative to cumulative revenues, because
With the whole goal that we want to exercise the taxpayers' dollars rather than have it sit in the bank account.
Yeah, right.
But you spend it appropriately, not spend it.
Well, yeah, we knew that. That was a given.
Right, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
a given.
remember
That's a
back-
given.
Last year when I was chair, I did that report which showed by year what the spending was.
Mhm.
And in the last year that we looked at, it was very close, a couple $100,000.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that we're gonna see it flip over where because we have a cumulative unspent balance, which is not small. I mean, some of it's already assigned for
Projects.
No, I'm sorry, for emergencies, the reserve.
Okay, yeah.
But there's still a fair amount of money that could be spent, and what are we in year 5 now, so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'd hope to see a couple of years of overspending to whittle that thing down. So that we're
Right.
closer to
Fully
burn
Did
it
you have
back
a
like
quorum without us?
We did, but hello and welcome.
that. It wasn't any fun.
Well, you can blame it on me because
So we
I
don't see it
forgot my
spent
notes
this year,
and had to
maybe
go
in
back and get.
2026.
Now we have a better quorum.
And we'll just reflect in the minutes that both members Scott Pinsky and Pat Randolph arrived at 3:11 p.m. to the meeting.
We just got Mark's report, staff report, and so we were opening up for questions. Anybody with additional comments? We do not need a motion here, so I think we can move on then to the consent calendar, which is the minutes from, where are we? October? September, yeah. Does anybody want to pull that from the consent agenda? I'll be okay to take that.
For once, I did not read them, so I can't complain.
And make a motion that we accept the minutes.
I second.
And that's a motion from John McCauley with a second from Larry Minikis. And we can go ahead with the roll call vote. Starting with Scott Pinsky,
Approve.
Rebecca Suggs,
Yes.
Pat Randolph,
I'm going to abstain since I didn't read them.
Larry Minikis,
Yes.
John McCauley,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jim Wagner,
Approve.
and Chair Biggs. Okay. And that is a vote, the motion passes with a vote of 7 with 1 abstention. And there are no attendees present. We do not need to call for public comment.
Okay, great. So we can move on to the annual report committees. We are up first, Rebecca, on local. You can go first if you want, or I'm happy to go, whichever you'd rather.
I'll just say that Jenny, I started to say it rudely. Jenny worked a lot on the report this last couple of months, and I contributed a couple of paragraphs. So ours could, in theory, be ready to go. It would need a slight modification if we go without the staff report, but it sounds like we will have the staff report, in which case we'll need a slight modification to put the staff report info into it. So I would say a couple of hours maybe to finish it up. So it's ready to go essentially.
Yeah, perfect. We've got the shell and we're just waiting for that last staff report piece that we'll have, it sounds, by December 19th, and then we'll be able to slot that in and share it with the group. D-Space, who wants to go?
There's been no change, basically. We're waiting for numbers. There's been no change. Now that I've seen the core recommendations, there is some coordination we could make between relatively consistent observations, but when we get the core, we'll share it.
And just for Pat and Scott's purpose, one of the part of my executive officer's report is that the transition has been settled down of finance staff at Marin Wildfire. So I spoke with the deputy chief yesterday, and we have a deadline of December 19th for the financial data.
So core.
This is going to be a very short meeting. we're not going to catch our breath before we are done. So, Larry Meneke, Scott, and I worked on core, and I have written a kind of an overview paragraph that we can kind of use for everything to sort of talk about what we did to come up with the information for the reports, which is, you know, I've worked on several of these committees, so it applies to all of them. The first one that we talked about, and I brought this up at some meeting, is the fact that the Central Marin Zone has a $267,000 and change contribution to defensible space. And that continues to concern me, particularly because Central Marin put in money, but Southern Marin and Western Marin didn't. So that just seems imbalanced to me. If they need more money, it ought to be divided up between the three zones that are in the Defensible Space Alliance. You know, we have recommended that the executive officer look into why the funds were insufficient and why they only come from Central Marin Zone.
If I could just step in real quick, one part, so Marin Wildfire employs two of the leadership positions. Southern Marin employs the other leadership positions, so they get credit for that. So that's part of the reason why Southern Marin isn't contributing towards that, so that they get some of the benefit from that. Also, some of the.
I'm sorry, say that again. I mean, if someone is doing work for DSA activities, it should be allocated to DSA.
Correct.
Costs,
So right, but it's being covered from the Southern Marin Zone budget.
But the average person wouldn't know that.
I'm still want to pursue. I'll make sure I understand
Yeah.
what does that mean. I mean, if someone works in the Southern Marin Zone and their payroll's in Southern Marin, if they're contributing to DSA, they should be allocating costs to DSA.
Yeah, and that's part of the agreement that we have within that.
So they are allocating
yes,
costs.
they are.
So it doesn't matter whether they're fully hired in DSA or they're in Southern Marin and have allocated costs. From the perspective of DSA spend, it's the same.
Right.
Right. So that's not telling me anything as an accountant.
Okay.
Okay.
The second thing that we had questions about.
Oh, sorry, can I also interject on this one? You'll recall that we already sent our findings earlier, and our findings noted, and you can see it if you look at last year's data in terms of DSA, you've got some cities which are overspending, some cities that are underspending. It's kind of all over the place, right? So our observation or our recommendation was along the lines of yours. So I think when we get into final writing, we can kind of work together, because our suggestion was, okay, we know that, you know, every city, their revenues are contributed on essentially on a capitated basis based on the number of homes, and then they go out and they do their efforts also on a capitated basis based on costs. We got, at least at this point, there are 4 years under our record. And the point we made on our side was, okay, now's the time to project out to the end and say, if your goal is to inspect every house once or every house twice or every house 3 times or whatever it is, what's that total cost, what's the total revenues? And I was asking the question from the other side, if there is a shortfall, then you need to anticipate that by what you picked up on your side on local. And conversely, if there's extra money, you're not going to spend all of it because you don't need it, then that should be also anticipated and should go the other direction. So we're both hitting the same thing from the same direction. And I'm a bit surprised, I haven't delved into it like in down into the nitty gritty detail because they don't have any numbers yet, but within the DSA, there are both cities that are overspent and underspent. And I don't know whether that's because cities have not done inspections on a consistent level of volume, or it's because something, it's cheaper or whatever. It's a big math problem, which is easily resolved. I think we'd want to, our recommendation was to push out and project back and see where you stand. You're asking the same question from the other side.
Yeah, and maybe I will send you the amount, which is,
But we should all have the data soon.
yeah.
Right, so.
Well, is there a way for you all as you're finalizing what you write to,
Well, we can't do it
I
until
know.
we're in a group meeting, but it's
I know,
okay,
yeah.
it's not a big deal. I mean,
okay,
once your report's out at our next meeting, we can sit down together and hash out
Okay.
an answer. Once we all see it, then we're cool with the round. So
Okay.
it's just a way to court, it's two sides of the same
Okay.
story, and we've already shared it collectively in public
Yeah.
in this meeting, so,
and we know it's coming, okay.
yeah.
I mean, I think the biggest agenda item for us is gonna be the next one. So if this is something that we are sure we wanna cover next time, I think we're in
Yeah.
good shape. We can,
The next thing that we looked at, 3 different zones, Novato, Southern Marin, and San Rafael, I think.
Sorry about that.
that sounded like me.
had hires people who were working for them, who were being paid for out of the Marin Wildfire budget. And I've put in what we wrote up, the amounts of all of those. But the kind of observation is that Mark spent a lot of time overseeing the positions that exist now. And with more positions, it's going to be more of a job to oversee and make sure that they're only working on Marin Wildfire things, that they're not doing administrative work for the city of San Rafael or for, so I think that's going to, the recommendation is that Mark's gonna need to keep, the executive officer is going to need to keep a good eye on these to make sure that the money is being used appropriately.
And these aren't direct reports, these are just overall in the organization.
Yeah, these are just, in Novato, it's, they've hired a vegetation program manager, a senior vegetation management specialist, and a vegetation management specialist. They're, all being paid for. Are they spending all their time just on that? And
Are those core activities, or is some of that going to
That's a good
D-Space?
question.
I mean,
that's a good
Those 3
question.
positions are core activities,
okay,
but also administering some of their local projects as well.
okay, core and local, okay.
And administering defensible space, probably. I'm not sure, but
The defensible space is a separate position in the D-Space budget.
okay. But at any rate, those are things that are gonna need to be kept an eye on. Yes.
Would you mind if I expanded the question a little bit? Is that okay?
Yeah, no,
So because I read through this and I was very interested in, it says, so the executive officer carefully monitors these positions and receives reports from the sponsoring agencies. So they're currently giving him information that he can analyze, right? And then you spend a lot of time with them. So you should not be making a control, right?
Yeah.
So absent your inquiries, or what I'm asking for with regards to recommendation, was his oversight adequate? Right? And if it,
I think it was.
okay, so if it's adequate, then in future years, if similar positions are proposed, careful monitoring by the executive officer should be performed. So he's performing it currently.
Where did you get this? Did she put it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's online.
Oh, did
published.
she get it published?
Yes.
I didn't see that you got it published.
yeah, that's why I'm asking,
Okay.
Pursuing the language.
Okay.
Because this is
He's
the
just
time.
that good, he's that good.
All this language.
It is online. Now, this is the time we're supposed to do this. So
Yes.
in future years, if similar positions are proposed, careful monitoring by the executive officer should be performed. So what I'm trying to pursue is the executive officer currently performing adequate work in your view with regards to his oversight of these expenditures? If the answer to that is yes, then you're saying just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
But you also have the words, if similar positions are proposed. Now that confuses me. Are you saying if there's more positions or if these same ones continue? Because I assume they're already embedded into the operations in the budget, they will likely maintain that activity. Well, won't they?
And that's a good question. And we don't know whether they will be proposed or not.
And also, I presume that what happens is that core projects are approved by the board in the beginning of the cycle on a project by project by project basis, right? And then they get a report at the end of the cycle. So that would imply to me that the full board knows what these things are and they said, yes, they're okay.
I'm
Right?
talking about the executive committee.
The full board.
Full board sees everything, right?
In the work thing.
Yeah, the only reason I'm pursuing this so hard is because this goes back to one of my pet peeves, which has been the Rangers.
Yeah, yes.
And the whole Ranger question, right? And it took a nudge from us for the board to get interested enough to really pursue that Ranger question carefully to determine whether it was actually a police function or a function we should do for it. We are staying tuned on whether that has been resolved. You don't have to tell us, but certainly we're interested in that. So you have not questioned what they've done. You are comfortable as a subcommittee.
Well, we questioned it
And you're
and we're
satisfied.
satisfied with the answer.
You're satisfied that these activities are truly being spent and that they're spending the right buckets, by the way.
Yeah.
Local D-Space core, right?
Well, these are core that we're looking at.
Okay, and you believe that those are core efforts that they're making and things that, yeah.
Well, that we did not think about is whether these people are spending their time on core projects. And I'm trying to think how that could you hire somebody with core money and have them overlooking D-Space?
Well, if you do, you're hiring them for D-Space. That was the conversation I was making earlier about what you said earlier, because they're Southern Marin people, but if they're doing D-Space work, they go in the D-Space budget, right? So I've done a lot of cost accounting in my life, and I've seen a lot of little, where's the ball kind of things.
Right.
So that, if I was doing this, it's a good, I think you're onto a good thing. You might want to pursue it a little bit further and then expand that final conclusion out a little further. Because if there's adequate systems in place, if the reports are adequate, if the board has seen enough information at the beginning of the cycle to approve those activities, and then you don't find anything offensive in it, then I'm not sure what we would say, except, gee, you're doing okay. That's what we don't say everything else. We don't put a report out for everything else, and we're doing okay. So it's a very interesting question, and I'm not trying to steer you to either have it or not have it. I'm just looking at it from that perspective.
Well, to me, those are a lot of positions.
A lot of money.
And a lot of money.
Right.
Coming from those.
And was this for Novato?
Yeah, vegetation
Well,
management.
it's Novato, San Rafael, and Southern Marin.
So I don't know about San Rafael or Southern Marin, but in Novato, don't they have supervisory positions? And how does that correlate to what you look at, Mark? Or is there I think there's a supervisory.
There's a management and a senior, and then a super or a more of a ground level person. So yeah, and so through our work, as far as each year agencies that have staffing, I send a letter. It says, all right, how many positions are you filling? What is their percent of dedication towards wildfire related activities? But we also do on monitoring during the year. We're based on whether it's meetings that Ann has with the staff, going and looking at their projects, like the Greater Nevada Shaded Fuel Break. It's mostly being implemented by Marin Wildfire or by Nevada Fire staff, but Marin Wildfire staff also interacts with them. So we have this ongoing relationship. We're able to see them out there doing the work. And so that's what makes me feel comfortable that the level of commitment is there. It's more of a work productivity aspect of it.
So all these things pop into my head. If Nevada Fire people are doing the work, are you saying that?
Managing the work,
Okay.
hiring contractors, putting the contractors in there, managing the contractors and the work that they're doing.
Okay, so you got a vegetation program manager, a senior vegetation management specialist, and a vegetation management specialist for $345,000. So it's three different people. Now, I can tell you, I was very impressed when I went to last year's report and looked at all the core activities going on in Nevada. It was like I was sending my people down in my area, like, hey, what the heck, man? These guys
Get to
got
work.
30 good projects. And so I was, my bias is towards Nevada doing a great job there. But as long as you're comfortable that that's actually, they're doing core activities.
Yeah.
They're managing core activities and it's necessary, then that's
And-
good, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
and to be, I mean, from my perspective anyway, in the like world of lingo and wildfire prevention, vegetation management is a huge part of what needs to happen for wildfire prevention. So I wouldn't be tripped up by the fact that there are people doing that. I would be reassured that there are people doing that for whatever that's worth. I don't think it's wrong to ask the question and make sure that they're working on wildfire prevention, but that's there's home hardening, there's vegetation management, and it all, that's part of the equation.
Well, and presumably the vegetation management that this person is doing is things like the shaded fuel break. It's not the vegetation management around people's, around people's houses.
Yeah.
It's the, it's
Right.
big projects.
Yeah, gotta be really careful that everything goes in the right bucket. That's really important to the overall meeting the expectations of the public. And it's not only, it's also important, it's interesting because the definitions of those three, I've looked through these before, there's a little softness in them, which is good. It was well written. So you can kind of squeeze some things around, but you just don't want to make sure you create an empire that's not doing anything.
You want the right amount of flexibility.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was just my reaction reading it.
Yeah.
With
So,
my clairvoyance.
the next one is Novato has a multimedia campaign on which they are spending $130,000. And that just raised the question for us, why aren't all the areas needing money, or why isn't this all being done by Fire Safe Marin, who is our advertising arm?
Mhm. And how do you direct money just to Nevada?
Well, and that's,
I mean, if it's IJ, it's everywhere, right? So,
well, I think what they're doing, and I Mark can correct me, but I think they're hanging banners off of,
It's a lot of it in-town signage. Most of the multimedia campaign is in-town signage. They've set up some kiosks at hardware stores supporting some of the work that's going on, and then
Maybe
also
flyers,
and
mailers.
then it's partially flyers, but also online media that's really focused to the Nevada residents and branded as Nevada Fire. It's got the Nevada Fire logo and the Marin Wildfire logo.
Next door or whatever else.
And we know a lot more than the rest of you guys.
I'm tired of
Good job.
hearing about Novato being better than all the rest of us are. So the next one is well,
Can I
Yeah.
just add on to that? It's a good thread for you guys to be pulling on, in my opinion, because that is one of the conversations we had with the operations committee, and we are forming an ad hoc subcommittee of the operations committee of, is there better ways to streamline and centralize our communication strategies? So
Cool.
you guys coming up with this finding and recommendation is in alignment with what we already started with the ops committee.
and that's essentially what our recommendation is somebody needs to be looking into this to, you know, we're not the policymaking group, but somebody needs to be looking into whether somebody does need to make a policy. The next one is this is a little bit weird to me, that Southern Marin has come up with an abatement program. And I thought we had a 2% abatement program built in all over the county. And then,
We killed that, right? The board killed that, right?
So I'll give you some background. There's voluntary abatement and then there's forced abatement. The 2% was dedicated towards forced abatement.
Right.
In order to do forced abatement, you had to have an ordinance to allow forced abatement.
Yeah.
It requires a ton of staff work. It requires a court order to go onto the property to do the work. And most agencies who have abatement ordinances find that it's not worthwhile pursuing that. It's not, you don't get the bang for your buck out of it.
Mhm.
So the voluntary abatement actually started in Central Marin using local dollars, where rather than doing a forced abatement, they go to the property owner and go, you are a very high risk property. You need to have a lot of work done. We are willing to pay to partner with you and pay for a lot of this work to get done. However, you're not just going to get it for free. We're going to work out a cost share for you. One particular house had shake siding and a shake roof and horrible vegetation around it. So the deal, and it was right at the top between Mill Valley and Corte Madera, right at the top of the ridge. I mean, it was a horrible location, right? And so Central Marin Fire approached them and said, we will do the vegetation management. You need to, but in order for us to do that, we won't do it unless you change your siding and your roof.
Yeah.
The resident changed the siding and the roof, and then they used the voluntary abatement for the vegetation, and now the resident is maintaining the vegetation that's been done. So that was done out of local dollars. Following that footprint, that's when Central Marin decided to put it into as a core project.
this is Southern Marin.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, Southern Marin, following Central Marin's lead, they decided to put it as a core
okay.
project.
Okay. It was a little unclear, and Scott can speak to this probably better than I can. It was unclear what criteria they were using to, you know, whether it was an income criteria, change the siding on your house, you know, just exactly what was involved in deciding who gets to have this abatement and who doesn't. And
was there an application program where you had to give financials and demonstrate need, for example, that kind of a thing?
Yeah.
So those are some of the questions that came up.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too. I mean, I'm glad they did it, but siding, roof and siding, that's generally 100% the homeowner's responsibility. And I don't think there's a lot of planning capability to force a pre-existing situation to get abated, right? In other words,
Unless it's non-conforming to code or something.
well, when it was built according to
Right,
code,
right.
then you're done. You can't, you know, it's a legal non-conforming. If the new code's different
Yeah,
than the
it's
existing code.
grandfathered.
Yeah, it's grandfathered. Yeah, legal non-conforming is what they call it. So it's kind of interesting.
The other thing that we were talking about in terms of this particular item was the specificity to a given area. This was Southern Marin, and you know, funds going to that particular area to help homeowners in that particular area, to help out the homes in that particular area. And should that be something that's more broadly available to people? Why are we giving that benefit to just a certain population of the county. Obviously, it's a pilot program, so that kind of explains that. And
Yes, Pat, before we discussed this whole question of having multiple layers, I've always been bothered by multiple layers of assistance provided to different programs, local, core, and it bugged me. And the one good thing that Mark said was, well, it's all in one database, right? So there's not any double dipping going on there. So they do keep track of it. It's all one thing that there's a single application process. So I felt relatively okay about that. And I presume these would have been described in the plan that was approved by the full board as a project, or did it come later?
No, it was part of the full plan.
Okay, so the board knew they were doing this, right? So the question is, if the board is comfortable doing a little like, let's try a few things and see how they work, is it our role to say, board, you're doing the right bad thing? I don't know.
yeah, no, I don't know that it's our role to do that. I think about it also in terms of a public relations phenomenon, that if somebody in Novato finds out that somebody in Southern Marin got a grant, essentially, that they don't have the opportunity to apply for, that could, generate some dissatisfaction.
Right.
And by the way, Novato has out of local funds, I think,
They do.
they have a pretty much more extensive than the rest of the county.
Yeah, Novato is probably a bad example.
Well, it's because they're the best, right?
Yeah, they're,
I mean, we already know that.
I mean, if somebody in Lagunitas sees this and says, well, where's my grant? Where's my?
Do we think on that, I'm curious about this, and maybe this is a subject to talk about at the holiday party, but on the, or maybe not. On the sour grapes front, is there a broad understanding within the county among community residents that there are differential levels of risk, and that they actually, like someone in a low risk area or a low risk parcel benefits from a high risk parcel being mitigated and getting more dollars than they get at their low risk parcel because of the community? Like, is that something that in the firewise communities that you all are active in, that awareness is high? Or do you think there's an opportunity there to communicate to people more effectively about the fact that it's not about getting your equal dollar in, dollar out from Marin Wildfire?
Well, I think if you're talking about projects such as a fire break, people generally understand this is a high risk region, and therefore a project in this region makes sense, whereas 4th Street in Santa Fe doesn't need a fire break, okay?
Yeah, right.
So there's that basic understanding. As far as a homeowner in a home on a parcel versus another homeowner in another home on another parcel, do they have the same attitude that, oh, well, I'm not in a high risk area, I don't need access to funds?
Or even
I don't know.
high risk angle of my wall, whatever.
Or
yeah.
I'm on a slope,
yeah,
or
yeah.
I'm not on a slope, or
Yeah,
Amber
I would
shadow,
love in a perfect world for us at some point to get to a point where all community residents are bought into this idea that Marin Wildfire can do scientific analysis to prioritize and spend the dollars according to what will benefit all of us the most, instead of according what will benefit us equally.
it's not gonna be apples
Does
and
that make
apples
sense?
every
Well,
single
yeah,
time.
I would push back a little bit because I was very involved in this. When we constructed this thing, remember we said 80%.
Yeah.
And that's literally why it's there.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
That's why, as long as you hit the 80% number, you can be 120%, which means that, as long as everyone gets at least 80 cents back for every dollar. And we didn't do it by city, we did it by zone. So we did that very carefully.
Yeah.
And at the very last minute, and I think that's structurally built into the thing. But I also have kind of just I don't remember, but we've been talking about this since I've been on this thing. This question of differentiation of support dollars which go to individual homes, right? I don't think we've ever commented about it. Maybe we did. I don't remember whether any of the prior COC reports contained any sort of commentary about it. I know we've talked about it
I haven't seen it.
before. And maybe, so remember I said a few minutes ago, well, if people are trying different things. So now we're fairly mature. So maybe now's the time to say, okay, we observe that there are multiple different sets of rules in terms of how various cities are providing support and coming through various different buckets. And maybe the time is now to, not to say don't do it anymore, but to address it and say, okay, what have we learned fundamentally to your comments about, the most good for the community? Maybe that's a suggestion that the executive committee or the board review all the overlapping projects that are not consistent to determine whether that is the right answer. Because maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but maybe it hasn't been looked at like top down before. Does that seem like a finding possible?
It's, when talking about, who gets what kind of money, you can always apply to MWPA directly and get a grant from MWPA if your city isn't doing things. I've gotten both from the city of San Rafael and from Marin Wildfire. And but that's one.
Sorry to interrupt you. The city is funding it through MWPA. So there are multiple programs.
Yes.
All with MWPA money, which have different criteria. And that's why I pushed back on that a year or two ago. And you said, well, don't get too rattled up about it because it all goes into the same database and you can't, whatever. But maybe now is the time to step back and say, we've done this for a while. We've done some experiments. Are we comfortable continuing with this diversified approach to these matters? Or maybe now is the time to do it all collectively. I don't have a strong point of view either way, but it might be helpful if the people who make the decisions, the board and the executive committee, maybe they should step back and get a report that says, these are all the programs for which people get money. This is one, this type, this is that, here are the various types, and here are the criteria, and they're different. Some are economic, some aren't economic, some abatement, because you're either curmudgeonly pain in the ass, or you're on the top of a giant hill and there's winds going at you in every direction, which is fair enough, Maybe now's the time to.
Being on the top of a hill shouldn't be, it's being on the bottom of a hill that you're going to light everything that's on fire.
He taught me about ember shadows, so I don't know. Anyway, whatever. Maybe there's a finding there.
If the wind's blowing strong enough, I don't want to be giving it a test.
Are you asking whether now is the time to look for best practices?
Yeah, proposing that we suggest that we've observed, and without any adjective, a variety of different activities, and we can list them. Anytime anyone gets money, these are ways people get money, right? And kind of summarize all of them, and from what bucket they come from, because they come from local, they come from core. I don't think they come from these space, but who knows? And these are all various different things that are happening. All of them have been approved individually, and maybe now is the time to step back and look at them collectively, as we're now a much more mature organization, and conclude that we are satisfied with this continued diversity, or that we believe that maybe a more uniform approach is more appropriate. So that might be a finding. It'd be core finding for you guys to think about.
Something to consider. How are we on the report? We have a sort of meaty topic next, if we're ready.
Basically one more.
Yeah, one more point, okay.
So the last thing on ours is we're giving nearly $1 million to Fire Safe Marin. And they are an independent organization whose entire budget is coming from us.
100%.
Yes, they get nothing else except from us. They are smart enough that when they write up their proposals, they're doing it by, here are the deliverables we are going to give. The reality is we're paying 3 people's salaries, or maybe 2 people's salaries. I can't keep track with how many people who work for Fire Safe Marin these days. But it just seems a little unusual to me that we're paying 1/20th of our income to an organization that is not a part of us. And it may be smart not to, that I'm not real sure whether they get benefits or not, those people who work for them.
They don't.
And then if they worked for us, they'd have to get benefits.
Why, fire guys have to, but other people don't have to, do they? In
Medical benefits and stuff like that.
Okay.
But anyway, it's something to think about.
Sounds like a
That-
good comment.
That it's an independent organization. Now, I have learned, and I was very happy to learn, that FireSafe Marin meets with Mark periodically and talks about what they are doing and what needs to be done.
Are
So
they under direct supervision of the board?
Fire Safe Marin is its own nonprofit entity that we have a contractual agreement with. And then I meet with them, with their staff weekly, and then with their executive leadership on a bi-weekly.
But is 100% of their funding come from it?
They do receive quite a bit of grant funding from, not quite a bit, but upwards of $200,000 to $300,000 a year of grant funding outside of Marin Wildfire.
okay, I had thought that that they weren't doing any other fundraising.
But you get funds from other sources also.
We've, in the
Yeah.
5 years we've been around, we've gotten $7 million in grants.
So,
Well, sounds like a good comment.
yeah, but it's something that's worth thinking about as to, as we said here, what are the financial ramifications for bringing them entirely under.
I would just add to that board oversight. Board oversight.
Yeah.
The depth of board oversight would be a comment. I think you can build into that, right? Because the board's ultimately responsible for the $20 million.
They are
So the board
able
is-
to get other funding, Marin, FireSafe Marin, as an NGO. I mean, Moore Foundation is
I
funded.
mean, I think they are able to, and they used to get all their funding from, I have been going to FireSafe Marin meetings since long before they were a part of, they've always had oversight over the Firewise groups. And that was kind of the way in which I went to their meetings. But they used to spend a lot of their time fundraising. And since they have become under the umbrella of Marin Wildfire, they have not had to spend time fundraising. And
Well, I think it's worthy comment. I'd just leave it at that for now. So.
Right, and I think another way of looking at this is that the board is saying, we're gonna allocate 5% towards education. Education comes through FireSafe Marin, so that's the other way of looking at it. Maybe the board formalizes the education component. We will formally provide this much towards education each year. They're doing it.
Yeah.
But
and
the question comes up.
I guess the question to me is, it's more marketing than education. And I think one of the reasons we brought them under was for the education reason, and now what we're doing is much more of a marketing, advertising. They have things in the IJ all the time. They have
But Pat,
headers and-
marketing and advertising is to sell something. I wouldn't call it marketing or
Okay.
advertising necessarily.
Yeah,
It's still education. I mean,
yeah, okay,
yeah,
It's to engage our residents to take action.
yeah,
And I'll use one of the biggest campaigns we had was the Open Your Report campaign. And I'm sure you saw it all over the IJ, you saw it on signs. And so, yeah, you can call that marketing, but it was to drive people to their reports, to open their
Yeah.
reports and take action.
no, all of I will admit, all of their things are in some way, shape or form educational, whether it's open your report or get your go bag ready.
It's engagement,
They're engaging people.
community engagement.
Scott, do you have anything more to add to what we've said so far?
The only thing I guess I would say is that I'm a little unsure what the term umbrella means that we've used, because it suggests control that I'm not sure is there. And I don't know what the folding in strategy or objective or reality is or are. So from what I'm hearing today, my understanding is that funding for Fire Safe Marin largely comes from Marin Wildfire through an allocation each year that the board approves. But the structure and, identity of Fire Safe Marin is still the 501c3 that it's always been. So in terms of, does that make them under an umbrella of sorts? I don't know. It's a little vague to use that term because it implies that it's been absorbed into Marin Wildfire, which I don't know is the reality.
Well, I
Sounds like
can
it's a
point it out.
grantor relationship.
Yeah.
I can point it out a different way. It's more collaborative because, we have the Environmentally Sound Practices Partnership. And while we work very closely with the fire department and such, in coordination, it's collaborative. It's still collaborative.
Who's the we in that sense?
The ESP. Our
I'll
ESP.
talk to you about ESP
Okay.
on the drive home.
We'll learn you about it. Yeah. In fact, we're gonna have Daniel Swain next Wednesday, and I should say it, at
Yes.
MCL, so.
The conversation you guys are having is very similar to the conversation that we had multiple times at the operations committee, and that is really digging deep in the client contractor versus stakeholder versus partner relationship that is between Fire Safe Marin and Marin Wildfire. And so
And or subsidiary.
or subsidiary. So that's why we've been working on a very detailed scope of work for Fire Safe Marin, and also clarifying reporting and roles and responsibilities. And the awkward part of it is that Fire Safe Marin way predates Marin Wildfire.
Yes.
And had these-
1991.
And had these interrelated relationships with the fire departments, otherwise known as our member agencies. And then Marin Wildfire comes in after the fact. And so now we have these intertwined relationships that may or may not be in positions of conflict of interest out of it, just because of growth. So one of the things that we feel that Fire Safe Marin may need to do is to reevaluate who populates their board of directors. Because there's been some cross contamination, for lack of a better word, because of the role of Fire Safe Marin changed dramatically when Marin Wildfire came about. Because with Fire Safe Marin, a lot of their grant application they were going for was for mitigation work. And so they really changed mitigation work with public education. Now that we have a sustainable revenue from Marin Wildfire, they've backed off on trying to get money for mitigation work, and it's more for public education and outreach. And so we think there needs to be some restructuring within Fire Safe Marin. So that's a long way of saying that I think you guys are pulling on the same string again that the operations committee is.
Well, the question I would have is also one of branding, right? So we're up for renewal here, right? And if we fully fund Fire Safe Marin, and that is really us, and Fire Safe Marin is a separate entity, but it also predates us and has different relationships, what's the better answer? Right? Should it be FSM and part of NWPA, right? And FSM Marin Wildfire? We talked about this a while ago with like the D-Space inspections when they were Novato, and we wanted to have them have a Marin thing on their shirts, right? So that branding question's come up multiple times. I think we're in the weeds too far here, but I think it's a worthy question to bring forward. My reaction.
And finally, and we didn't really quite write this up, but there in the JPA-wide proposals, about halfway down is something called data-driven wildfire risk framework. And then below that are our relationship with Genesis, Ladrers, GIS, you know, a whole bunch of different things, including some wildfire risk perception surveys that are going on, and a county-wide fire road inventory and assessment. And when I talked to Ann Krelock about this data-driven wildfire risk, for which $320,000 is allotted, she said that what that was, and Mark can correct me because I was trying to talk to Mark and he was getting ready to go off on
It's a baseball thing.
baseball.
More likely.
Just a guess.
And, but Anne sort of explained it as, well, this is sort of coordinating all those other things, you know, that the work of bringing in all of those other things. And my comment was, well, isn't that just staff time? You know, what are we paying you for if we need to give you $320,000 more than what we're already paying you? And I don't know, we in the end didn't write it up, so I don't know. The, you know, Mark can comment.
I actually, I'll be honest with you, I'm amazed at how little we're paying for our data, our analysis.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
All right.
So we're not going to talk about it and don't write it up?
Yeah. But the data is actually coming from Genesis, Ladrers, Fireside, the GIS, you know, all those different programs. It's not coming from this one item in the JPA-wide proposals.
So it's all, it's one of those things that's all interconnected. We have our GIS budget. And so Green Info Network created for the vegetation management, Green Info Network created the data collection system that we use using Esri Field Collector, the app is called. And then that gets put into our data repository. Then it goes to Willow Labs for the analysis. And then it comes back out of Willow Labs and goes into our dashboards. That's just one component of it. And then when we are doing our project design, that's where Willow Labs is coming in before the project ever happens, and it's showing us whether it's our points of entry to the community by using pathways analysis, and now we're bringing urban conflagration analysis. So all of that data driven is all of that that's going in A, to design the projects, and then B, after we get the projects implemented, analyzing the risk reduction that's been created and broadcasting that onto our dashboards. The same with our defensible space dashboards. It's the data gets collected by our DSpace evaluators, goes into Fireside, it goes out of Fireside, goes into Willow Labs. Willow Labs does the data analysis as part of that, and then it comes back to Green Info Network to go into our maps that are on our dashboards. So that's why I think the price that we're paying for that is a remarkable deal.
Yeah, it takes a lot longer than that, by the way. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That was Great, and thank you so much, everybody, for the work on these different sections, and looking forward to the December 19th report so we can finish up and cross the finish line on these drafts.
And I just want to thank Pat for the summary from our subcommittee. She did a really good job.
Yeah, I would really like to see us begin to get things out in a more timely manner so that we can have some influence on the work plan that's going to come out in May.
We were on track with this year,
Yeah.
and then it fell apart.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I think you still have an opportunity. I think you're on pace for it.
But
I mean, if we can all just be queued up and ready to go for that staff report on December 19th, then just slot in the information that we're waiting for, I think.
so December 19th, is that when our?
Yes, sorry, that was from the
That's
staff
when we'll get
report.
the
That's when we-
finance data from the finance team.
Okay, and when is our next meeting?
January, let's see here. 28th.
I would assume that it is something in January.
28th.
Yeah, see, that bothers me because we're at the end of January and we'll talk about the report and then we'll have one more meeting and then it's going to have to go to the graphic designer and it's gonna be March before it comes out.
Which is still like
But it's still better
way
than
earlier
we've been-
than ever.
than we've
I
been
don't think,
doing, but-
we worked so hard on that template ahead of time. I don't know that the graphic designer will have to take that long this time.
Yeah, and I tried to follow the template in writing things up.
Pat, would you prefer to see if the COC could be a week or two earlier, like the 14th or the 21st? I mean, is that where you seem concerned about doing it so late, you know?
I feel like the sooner we can meet, the better.
Well, first you have to be realistic.
Yeah.
Once you get to mid-December,
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're not
Right.
doing anything. Let's
Right.
be realistic about this. I don't know about you
Yeah.
guys, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's it. I'm pretty
That's
much
it.
done now. You know,
yeah,
so it's really gonna be January before we start doing it.
but do we have to wait until January 28th? You know, can we come back to an earlier Wednesday in January?
Well, one suggestion I would make to counter that would be that we have to get a report, any sort of written documents to the, a week earlier, right? So.
Yeah.
Right, to get it out, so if you push it back to the middle, that means you really have to be done in the very beginning of January, which is again unrealistic, so. I would say that if we actually get written projects from all of us that are pretty far along in time to share them collectively and do what we just did today where we all push back on everyone's thoughts collectively, because the only time you can do that is in one of these meetings, I think that would be a success, right? Right.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is talking about and considering extending terms.
Which
And
is quite good.
This is not unrelated.
Yeah, it's exactly the
This
same
is not unrelated to the
topic.
subject of this report, because otherwise what we have is a bunch of people terming out before we get things across the finish line.
Right.
So,
Then we term out in December, right?
as Mark has said, the good news is these terms
So,
were
Larry,
set
you're gonna
by
be
the
gone?
Community Oversight.
I'm technically history after today,
And Rebecca is gonna be gone.
Right.
Right.
both of us.
But these terms were set by the Community Oversight Committee, so the Community Oversight Committee has the ability to extend the terms, as I understand it. So that's the question.
The term limits, the years in the term, limiting to 2 terms, the date of the transition, all determined by the COC. And not something that was, the way the JPA language was written was not something that was subject to approval by the board. So this is a decision that the COC can make without going to the board. And we've struggled with this every year, that we have this right, you guys are right in the middle of it. and we have a transition of bodies.
Yeah.
And then I'll use Jim as an example. Jim comes in and it's like,
Hello, Vice Chair.
Yeah.
You're the
Welcome
vice
to
chair
the
now.
COC.
Scott, what?
is this all?
And so perhaps a solution can be, even though we say the language says we have a 9-person, what if we were to build a shadow period for the 3 positions that are terming out, build in a shadow period to allow the departing member to help finalize that report,
Right.
mentor the non-coming member, and then once the report is done,
Sounds like the term should be mid-year to mid-year.
that was a long discussion of the terms as well. We landed on where we did just because of when the first group started their terms.
One
Yeah.
other thing that I'd say that I like about the flexibility of the shadow term is that if we moved it to mid-year, that assumes that we're gonna stick with the same annual report schedule too. And since my time on it, it's shifted every year. It's been different. It's a little
And we want to get
arbitrary.
it faster and faster.
We're trying to get it faster,
Right,
to be
so-
fair, and we are doing it, we're succeeding at that, so it's not a shortfall, but it's been a moving target, is all I would say. So trying to pin it to a moving target would be tricky.
And if we're successful, this cycle being fundamentally done in January, because we've done most of the work. We were anywhere near this position last year or the year before.
Yeah.
Right, and now we're delayed because we don't have our numbers. So if we get our numbers quickly, then we can button these things up, because we don't have that much to do. And we have a decent product in January. I don't see it being unreasonable that in the subsequent period, we won't even need a shadow, because you get it done in November and December, right? So, but a lot of that is on you guys. Be ready for us, right? So, and you can.
And-
You will need a shadow because the terms really end November. December was the start of our original term. So you would kind of need a shadow for December.
All I'm suggesting is that next year we could be completely done by December.
Yeah.
June's the fiscal year end. The books are supposed to be closed by September. We could, as we've now learned, we can do a lot of our work before the books are closed, right? I mean, that's what changed this year, is we just went straight from the prior year straight into the current year. And we got a lot of our groundwork. All the work we did was done by September, right? And then we just didn't get the numbers. So it could be indeed next year that the numbers are available in September, as they should be, because you get your books closed 3 months after year end. Doesn't seem like that's like a big lift. Then you'd have 3 months to get the report out. So it might indeed, I'm not saying that it's guaranteed, but it might in fact be that you don't need a shadow next year because it will elapse by December. Right?
Mark, do you think the financial reports are potentially going to be available a lot earlier than December in the future?
We've had them earlier before.
Okay.
Who's are not in now?
No, we only have one report that's not in, and that's the D-Space from Marin County Fire, because they are closing their books at the end of the fiscal year or the calendar year because of the way the D-Space program works.
But I thought you fixed that.
We have all of the other data. It's actually, normally we close out our core stuff before we have all the local D-Space stuff. It's backwards this year because we had that transition to finance staff at Marin Fire. And when you only have 2 people in your accounting team, when 50% of that team changes, it's a significant impact.
It's also good that you have a $20 million organization that's so skinny. That's a good thing.
To mention it
I'm
to
serious.
you,
I'm serious.
somebody
I'm
called
not
me
joking.
up
Sure.
and one
So I don't think we
was
have to solve
trying
this
to
in the next
log
50
in.
years, but would it make
And
sense that
they
we
were
consider
trying to log in, it was
extending-
saying the meeting has been canceled. We were gonna have one person watching this meeting and said when he tried to log in, it said that the meeting had been canceled. So it's a little late, I didn't, and Scott didn't remind me.
I forgot.
I will go home and call up this person.
For me to get in, I followed the link that was on the web agenda.
Huh,
Same. So we just.
We're broadcasting right now, right? So,
yeah, so
It's working.
I don't know how.
And
So,
Rebecca,
Okay, let's get back on point.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah,
So I was in the middle of a sentence, and my suggestion is that since we have the flexibility, I would like to make a motion
Thank you.
that the existing committee members continue until we get the report out, at least for this cycle. And then see how things go in future years.
So anyone who is
Do the committee
potentially
members,
turning
do the
out.
existing committee members get to say?
Well, I was
And
gonna
you
say,
have to see, are you willing?
I was
Are
gonna
you
say,
willing?
is this optional? Yeah. is
Yeah,
this
exactly.
optional?
You will stay here.
Right, that's how.
You've been
We don't have a
voted into
choice.
continued
We're just
service.
Martina, lock the door.
So Rebecca, are you
They're
willing to stick
skinny
around?
here, so it's okay, even if it's not ours.
Rebecca, are you willing to stick around a little bit longer to wrap this thing up?
Well, as a matter of fact, no. I'm willing to hang. I'm not even want to say this out loud. I would not want to have my not hanging mean that the report's not going to get out in a timely fashion. However, me hanging around for an extra, how many months are you going to ask for, John?
I'm not asking anything,
Can
one or
we,
two.
can we make the
one or two.
motion as an optional?
Yeah.
Can we make the motion for people who would term out to optionally stay on
Up to,
for an extended shadow
For
period?
a short period
Short
until,
period until-
until either the report is out or their component of the report is stable.
Or they opt out, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they can always just opt out.
Yeah.
And do you want to say anything about, are we going to have new people on board in January for us to shadow with?
Right.
Yes,
We should.
we should.
well, is that impeded by the fact that the board is 9 people, as I understand it? In which case, if you add a new person in January, now you're at 10 or 11.
I think we just call it
Shadow.
a shadow period, emeritus period.
And they're non-voting or whatever.
Well, you have to be able to still weigh in on the
Mhm.
issuance of the report. And we're also short one person anyway, no matter what.
Yeah.
Because we don't have anyone to fill the
Two pieces.
taxpayer.
Taxpayer and the CBO.
Oh,
Right,
okay.
and then Theo,
That's,
who's on, yeah.
I mean, he's a nice fellow, but.
Yeah,
he's not
that's
voting.
true, that's true.
So this short period of time, I don't think it creates any parliamentary problems is what my reaction is.
Or anything that would be perceived as an issue to the public.
But it also sounds like Rebecca's portion, that the group that Rebecca is working with is nearly complete.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that the extra help that we would need from Rebecca is probably light as well.
Mhm.
So, being cognizant of Rebecca.
Yeah, Rebecca, you and I can talk. I want to support you in whatever timing you want.
Well, and I do think we'll have our report ready one way or the other by the end of this calendar year. My concern would be if shadow to me sounds like not finishing the report up so much as getting a new person up to speed to be able to get a new report or to get a new, anyway, if we
No,
have somebody to backfill for me, great, I'm willing to hang in for long enough to get them up to speed.
yeah, I don't think any departing members would be responsible for onboarding new members. I think the ones who are still around can do that because members aren't even going to be assigned to particular committees. And every year these committees aren't standing, they change, right?
Mhm.
Because otherwise it's a Brown issue. So once this report's out, we get our new people on board, you start introducing them, and then we'll later figure out who's going to be on what committees. And most likely, there will not necessarily need to be any meetings for quite a while, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of it, right? So, I mean, if we got this thing in good shape in January, where everyone got together and reached fundamental agreement around wording, now which reality-wise, there's probably going to be one more meeting after that to make sure all the wording went right? And then you get the thing out. That's February. Then you really don't need to do anything until most likely May, in preparation for June, right? Or April, May time period.
Set your committees.
Yeah, set your committees and do some of your pre-work, right? Because between June and September, you can get a lot of work done, even though the data is not available yet. That was our aha we changed this year. And that's why we got a lot of it done earlier. So it seems logical.
Yeah, It does.
So let me amend what I said in terms of what
The motion?
my motion is. So my motion would be that we would recognize that we are almost at the finish line and that existing members who time out this year have the opportunity
Yes.
to stay on board with sufficient time to, if not finalize the report, get it close to finalization before they drop off on their elected basis.
Could I add an addendum to that?
Sure.
And that would be, and we put on an upcoming meeting agenda, a discussion of the timing of which members are going off when and which members are taking over which roles, so we can connect the dots. You know, who is gonna need to be onboarded, and there might not be anybody to onboard them, for example. So
Yeah, we did that last meeting actually, but I don't remember either, so.
yeah, I don't remember it all,
Yeah.
so.
Well, the timing is perfect. We can add that as a committee member request regarding future agenda items. And maybe for the sake of the motion, we can keep it at your motion, which was existing members who term out this year have the opportunity to stay on board with sufficient time to get the report close to finalization before they drop off
On a voluntary basis.
on a voluntary basis.
Are there 3 of us that are coming out or 2 of us?
Technically 3, but one of the seats was vacant. And that's taxpayers.
Second.
Great. Got a motion and a second.
Okay. There have been some addendums, so we can refer to the minutes for the official motion and addendum to it, just so that we have it.
I withdraw the addendum. She's gonna put it on the agenda anyways.
Okay, I'll ask for your help to put it on the next
And
agenda.
Jenny just summarized it well, so you can
Okay.
pick that up off the.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody is,
And when is the next meeting?
January 28th.
28th.
okay, so I will go ahead and take a roll
That's absurd.
on the last.
So let me repeat, so what will happen, sorry, well, let's get the vote done first.
Yeah,
Okay,
So we had a motion by John McCauley and a second from Jim Wagner,
right, that's
Okay.
correct.
starting with Scott Pinsky,
Approved.
Rebecca Suggs,
Yes,
Pat Randolph,
yes,
Larry Minnicus.
Yes.
John McCauley.
Yes.
Vice Chair Wagner,
Approved.
Chair Biggs.
Yes.
Okay, so motion passes with unanimous support of all in attendance.
Right.
So as far as January 28th is concerned, Pat, we would have to have our work done by the 21st as individual teams in order to make the Brown publication. So assuming that you get the numbers in December, mid-December, that gives us 3 or 4 weeks with some of them pretty quiet time over the
Yeah,
holidays to
we
get it
don't
done.
really need numbers, numbers, numbers are, that's mostly, I don't know if we're gonna have a finance section of this.
We have to have a
again.
finance section that we all have to look at
Yeah.
collectively.
Yeah,
But at least for D-Space, they're relevant because your comments about some guys overspending or getting finance from core, and I'm seeing other
Yeah.
people who run it, that's all relevant, it all
Yeah.
fits together. And we're probably gonna have to, well, you've heard what I've said, so you might try to write your comment that is aligned with the one you've already seen from us to get us to a place that makes sense. So I think anything earlier than 22nd is premature. So I think that timing works, personally.
Okay. So we have one new agenda item that we will make sure comes up in January, which is discussion of member terms and roles, piecing together to connect those dots.
And onboarding.
Jim, your point in onboarding. Are there any other future agenda items that people would like to make sure we note?
Assuming that we'll be reviewing all the reports that'll be submitted by the 21st.
Yeah, those leave standing.
Okay.
Right, basically, we get ours in and then we see what everybody else is, and we have another meeting where we do what we do now, like we did today, to share thoughts, to tighten up collectively what the findings are, and then, get her done, so.
so then am I saying goodbye at this meeting or am I saying I'll see you in January?
Up to
I
you.
guess it's up to you.
It's up to you.
Yeah, it's up to you.
So I guess see you maybe in January.
Maybe.
Okay.
Well,
I was
we're
already-
very grateful no matter when that is, Rebecca.
Thank you, Jenny.
I was all ready to give my wave this afternoon.
Do you like how we did that? Bait and switch?
uh-huh.
Okay. I think with no other agenda items, we are ready to adjourn the meeting.
Okay. We need a motion for that.
You do not.
You do not.
See you, Rebecca.
Ah.